Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Kingdom Hearts Final Mix. In the last one we continued about doing some synthesis farming across the various worlds in the game, but also took care of our next super boss, Kurt Zisa, and now it's time for us to continue doing the synthesis farm on top of some other cleanup along the way. The first Heartless we're going to go after today is actually one we saw on screen earlier, but I didn't really talk about here on the deck at Neverland. This is the Jet Balloon. This mirror of the Aqua Tank tries to stay away from you largely. In fact, it doesn't even have a direct attack. Its main purpose is to spawn in a version of the screwdiver enemy from Atlantica known as Missile Divers to dash at you. You need to get up to this jet balloon as fast as you can and kill it, because it's actively only here for a short time period, entirely dependent on the amount of money you actively have. Namely, it can be here from 20 seconds to about a minute. If the Missile Divers hit you, you drop 100 money. And if you actively defeat the jet balloon when you have more than 100 money remaining, there's a guaranteed chance it will drop the synthesis material we're here for, a Dazzling Stone. There's also an additional 20% chance it'll drop a second one. The money-based damage aspect of that fight can seem scary, but actively just establishing Aurora or Iroga on yourself can completely bounce off any of the missile divers being thrown at you, so at that point the only challenge is actually chasing down the jet balloon and killing it. We need 6 Dazzling Stones in order to complete every single synthesis recipe in the game, so you might have that done in 3 tries, it might take you 6, either way, it's still pretty quick. Now I'm in Atlantica farming for 2 drops, actually. Specifically, the Thunder Gems dropped either 4% of the time by Screwdivers or 8% of the time by Aqua Tanks, or the Frost Gems dropped at those same rates by Sea Neons and Sheltering Zones, respectively. Either drop is a 10 or 20% drop with maxed out Lucky Strike boosts. We're going to need 15 Thunder Gems and 10 Frost Gems, which can be a little annoying to grab, but at the same time, that's mostly just because you're back in Atlantica. Also, not for nothing, if you're looking for Serenity Powers from the Pink Agaricus, you could theoretically do them here. There's points where actively doing the Pink Agaricus can be easier here, but also times where it's harder, because you can actively just float directly in front of the Pink Agaricus to get the hits in, rather than having to readjust yourself, but at the same time, it's pretty uncomfortable. At this point, we're back where Oogie's Manor once stood here in Halloween Town, as our next Final Mix exclusive Heartless is here. With that said, it only spawns sometimes. A way to tell if it will or will not is actively looking at the gate, which you might notice once more here has the red Trinity mark on it. If you've already done that Trinity and it's here again, we've randomly loaded the wrong encounter set here and need to leave the room and re-enter. If you come back in and the red Trinity mark is absent though, we're in the right version of the room. Once you get through a wave or 2 of White Knights, our main target here will spawn in the Chimera Heartless. We are here for its drop, the new Blazing Stone item, which we need 7 of. With that said, this is probably the second hardest synthesis material to grab in the game, as it requires a higher level of execution similarly to the Serenity Powers from the Pink Agaricus. Something worth noting though, compared to the Pink Agaricus, is that this minigame is only rough if you care about efficiency, as the monster itself has a flat 35% chance of dropping a Blazing Stone upon defeat, which with triple Lucky Strike is damn near a 90% chance. The big issue with execution in this fight is Donald and Goofy getting in your way, so the moment the Chimera spawns in, use a summon like Bambi or Simba that allows you free movement and Keyblade swings while having Donald and Goofy out of the way. There it is!
Get me straight!
The little minigame to get extra Blazing Stones here is weird. Upon depleting the initial health bar of the Chimera, it doesn't die, and instead gets stunned and its 3 heads bounce out of the jar you can see at the top of the creature. Our goal here is to swat the heads back at the body one at a time with the Keyblade. Each hit does damage outright to the main health bar of the enemy alongside giving you some tech points. Knocking 3 heads back in a row just rewards you with a pittance of cash. Knocking the heads back 6 times in a row gives you a bit more money alongside a 20% base chance of a Blazing Stone. And doing so 9 times in a row gives you some more money on top of that and a 40% base chance of a Blazing Stone. Assuming Lucky Strikes are at play, that means at 6 hits you have a 50% chance of a Blazing Stone drop, a 100% chance of one at 9 hits, and a 87.5% chance of one at the creature's defeat. From what I remember, I think Iroga can also bounce back the heads, but I often forget to do so because there's times where I just forget about that sub-effect of the higher levels of Arrow in the heat of the moment. I believe after either 9 hits outright or if enough time has passed, the heads will just head back into the creature and the fight will loop from there until the creature's eventual demise. The reason I do this specific setup here, sans Iroga, is twofold. For one thing, it gets Donald and Goofy out of the way, which prevents the heads from locking onto them and targeting them so I can more precisely line up my shots. For another, summons like Simba and Bambi allow me to still freely swing my Keyblade at the heads, meanwhile ones like Mushu and Dumbo don't allow me to do that at all. This and the Pink Agaricus are hard to farm from for different reasons. The Serenity powers from that big mushroom require more strategic precision for higher chances of the drop, while this one requires more on-the-fly thinking and reaction on top of a bit more randomness on top of that. Both of these farms suck. In fact, usually whenever I'm doing one, I wish I was doing the other for the opposite reason. As for the Chimera's attacks, it's got a punch with one hand, and on its opposite hand it's got a swipe and a grab attack. It can also backflip and then dash directly at you, and if it jumps, it'll often leave a wide shockwave upon landing. After a bit, it will also summon some gargoyles, which also makes grabbing the blazing stones annoying because there's just more targets to worry about interrupting your own attacks. I'd recommend targeting them if you can, but likely at most you're getting 2 cycles out of the minigame per encounter here no matter what, as the summons for Bambi and Simba only last so long. You could theoretically do it with Goofy and Donald around, but it's a lot more annoying, frankly. At the very least, like with the Pink Agaricus and the Ice Titan, this is a very good fight to get some tech points from in case you're trying to grind out some levels. So if you're trying to spice up your leveling process when you're trying to power level for trophies or the like, all these have some pretty good bonuses when it comes to doing that. You also probably want to use a longer Keyblade for this encounter in general, just so you can have longer swipes to swipe the heads back at the main body. The Metal Chocobo in specific is very good for this, which is why I think about doing that at the end of this encounter I actively show on the screen. After this fight, my next destination is actually to head back to Monstro, specifically where we did the second fight against the Parasite Cage, as another Final Mix exclusive Heartless will show up there. Now, worth noting, I actively foreshadowed earlier in the LP that Bambi has a secondary purpose as a summon. Specifically, there's charge gauges that Bambi has that fill up as you defeat enemies while he's out. Depending on how many charge gauges you fill, in whatever world you're in, synthesis materials can actively drop. For instance, if you get 3 gauges filled here in Halloween Town, there's a 20% chance he will spawn in either a power shard or a power gem, which can help you out in farming. I'll actively include the full list of that information later on in this video when we talk about the exacts we need for every single synthesis material before we do every recipe, because we're wrapping up synthesis today. Worth noting, before we head off to the Heartless here in the very top of Monstro, make sure you have some very high-level healing items in your inventory because our target here is the Grand Ghost. We want Frost Stones from this thing, specifically 7, and there's 2 of them right there. Attack-wise, the Grand Ghost will either swipe at you with its hands, slam them down on the ground, or spin in a circle with them, as we've seen with many other Heartless in the game. The thing is, the Grand Ghost cannot be damaged with physical or magical attacks, though using specific spells on it can cause it to drop high potions, or ethers. To damage it, you need to treat it like an undead enemy from Final Fantasy and heal it, specifically using consumable items. In order of likelihood, the Grand Ghost has a 5% base chance of dropping a Frost Stone if you use a Mega Potion on it, 10% base chance if you use a Mega Ether on it, a 35% base chance if you use an Elixir on it, and using a Mega Elixir on it not only guarantees a drop of a Frost Stone, it has a separate 20% base chance of dropping a secondary one. Outright defeating it also guarantees a drop of a Frost Stone. Thus, it's time to use those Mega Elixirs you've likely got piling up, as defeating a Grand Ghost with one of those has a decent chance of dropping at least 3 of the 7 you need. Next up, our final target is here in Traverse Town. Occasionally here in the 2nd District, we'll see a reskin of the Bouncy Wilds. These are Sniper Wilds. We want the Power Stones these drop, 5 of them I believe in specific. These enemies only have 2 attacks, and one of them we never want to see. Randomly as they walk around, they'll place bananas just like their Bouncy Wild cousins, but if you get seen by them, they'll shoot their slingshots at you and spawn in several cousins to mob you. If you get spotted though, you failed. They will no longer drop items or experience and you need to try again. Thus, the minigame here is stealth. At the start, only 1 Sniper Wild to spawn in. Defeating that one will cause 2 more to spawn in, then 3 more, and then the game loops back around to 1 spawning in. You need to stealthily take them out without being seen by the one you're targeting or the others that have spawned in. Thus, patience is really rewarded here. Stop is very good for this fight in general, but I especially recommend waiting in the distance until one moves away from the other and then targeting the one that's moved away. But I know some people swear by Mushu here, as it really allows you to hit them from a very great distance. If you get spotted again, just leave the room. Power Stones have a 35% chance to drop after you kill your 6th Sniper Wild, a 50% chance at 12 killed, 60% at 18 killed, a guaranteed one at 24 killed, and a guarantee of 2 of them at 30 killed. With that said, I at most usually average about 12, but with lucky strikes, that's more than enough good odds to actually get them. With that, we've effectively fought every enemy in the game, so it's time for us to finally go make every single synthesis recipe we've been saving up for at this point. But before we do so, let's talk about the exact list of ingredients and where the best places to get them are. Future me, I'm sorry for the editing I'm inflicting on you. So we've covered synthesis loosely in the LP already. The Moogles here in Traverse Town have recipes that require enemy drops and items found in chests, and by filling those recipes out, you can get some nuts, items, weapons, and accessories. In most cases though, the recipes require multiple rare drops, and unless you actively farmed them out along the way, you're probably going to have few, if any, of the materials required. Now, something I probably should have mentioned much earlier in the LP is that there are some people who recommend waiting until just before you rescue Kairi at Hollow Bastion to do the Synthesis side quest, and it's easy to see why. The general stat increases we've mentioned for every world after rescuing her means that grinding any enemy for drops can take longer in general. I don't mind this too much myself though, as the increased EXP yields for endgame balances it out in my opinion. Plus, the later into the adventure you actively start this, the more lucky strikes you'll likely have on your main party, and it'll actively also smooth out the process. Just to cover again, each lucky strike equipped on your active party increases the drop rate of an item by an additional 50% of its base value, meaning it maxes out at a 250% value in total. So a 20% value drop at base becomes a 50% drop if you have 3 equipped. Trust me, as low as the drop rates get on some of the items, that boost is very key. Focusing on the items here, there are 34 total synthesis ingredients to farm across the game's various worlds. This set of 23 were available in the original releases of Kingdom Hearts 1, while these 11 are the ones that were added for Final Mix. Those 11 new items also shifted around some recipe ingredients from the original release, on top of accounting for the additional 9 recipes added in this version of the game. I've stated thus far in the LP you need to finish one group of 6 recipes to unlock the next. That's just wrong, it's just what I always do for this section. Further groups of recipes are unlocked instead by how many unique recipes you've made out of the ones available to you. As we cover the 34 individual synthesis ingredients, we're going to talk about the enemies that drop them, what the best farming location is if there are multiple to begin with, their drop rate ranges, and in the case it applies, how many you need in both versions of the game. That's because several materials actively had their requirements increased here in Final Mix to also account for the extra recipes added in this version of the game. With the explanations out of the way, let's start this list with the most basic synthesis ingredient from the most basic synthesis family, Lucid Shards. In all likelihood, you'll have a few of these by the time you finish Agrabah at minimum. These are infrequently dropped by shadows, but you can guarantee a drop from White Mushroom enemies by finishing their minigame using gravity on them over in Agrabah or the end of the world. The Giga Shadows over in Wonderland are also a good source of them, as they get more likely to drop the further into their minigame you get, guaranteeing at least 3 if you finish the minigame completely. For efficiency's sake, due to the fact that they drop 3 and there's several shadows in the room alongside these enemies, I'd recommend this option the best for farming these items up. Lucid Gems are harder to come by. You're probably going to get at least a few as you make your way through Halloween Town's plot, as Gargoyles and White Knights both have them at low drop rates. White Mushrooms are going to be your best bet though, as you have a 10% chance of one dropping if you cast Gravity 3 times on them successfully. Worth noting that White Mushrooms you can cast Gravity on are only found in Agrabah or at the end of the world's penultimate room. Lucid Crystals though are quite rare, but at least the enemy that drops them is plentiful in late game. The only enemy that outwardly drops them is Dark Balls, at a 1% base drop rate at that. You might be farming this one for a while. There is one method we'll talk about at the end of this overview that can get you up to a 10% chance, which is much more reliable, but I tend to forget that exists. Oops. If you want to go the Dark Ball method, I'd recommend either running through Traverse Town post-Kairi rescue, or the Spiral Hill area in Halloween Town due to the amount of them that can appear there. Plus, with the amount of Gargoyles and White Knights, there are probably some good chances of some Lucid Gems dropping along the way. The next 2 materials are not a part of the Lucid line, but the enemies that drop them are adjacent enough to Dark Balls and Shadows that I want to cover them now. First off is the Fury Stone. This is dropped by Giga Shadows over in Wonderland, as we've mentioned and shown off before at least twice. These drop dependent on this enemy's minigame, where you need to defeat as many as you can without getting hit. If one hits you, they disappear, and thus you're locked out of a potentially higher reward tier. Fury Stones start dropping at a 10% base drop rate at 3 Giga Shadows killed without getting hit, all the way up to guaranteeing 2 of them if you kill all 7. It can be a little precise, but if you rely on things like Strike Raid or Ars Arcanum for their invincibility frames, this is actually a very easy farm to do. Wrapping up the extended Lucid line overview is the Stormy Stone. This Final Mix exclusive ingredient is dropped exclusively by the Neo Shadow enemies at the end of the world's penultimate room. Should you defeat all Neo Shadows present within the room, there is a 35% base chance that one will drop. Pretty sweet and to the point, honestly. Next up, we're entering the Power line of synthesis materials. Let's start off with the Power Shards. Chances are low, but reasonable you might leave Deep Jungle behind in the story with a few of these in your inventory. Power Wilds and Bouncy Wilds both drop these, though they're more common from the latter. As you'll no doubt get tired of me saying, you can also guarantee a drop of these from White Mushrooms if you finish off their minigame by casting Stop on them. Versions of the White Mushrooms that spawn in a Pink Agaricus do not count for this though, so you're either going to the ship at Atlantica or the end of the world if you're using this method. Power Gems aren't found until late game, as all the Heartless that drop them are first encountered in Neverland, but at that point, between whatever lucky strikes you have and the amount of them present, you're likely to leave with a few. Pirates, air pirates, and battleships all drop them, with the third being very likely to do so if you destroy the extra pieces of that Heartless. White mushrooms can also drop these if you hit them with stop all 3 times successfully. I would personally recommend the battleships more though, as while the shrooms are technically more consistent, farming the ships at the deck of Neverland has a chance to spawn in a Final Mix exclusive Heartless to help you out along a different grind later in the list. Final Mix introduced a new member of the Power family through the Power Stone, and this is actually one we just talked about a few moments ago. These are dropped exclusively by the Sniper Wilds found occasionally in Traverse Town's 2nd District. The more Sniper Wilds you defeat without being spotted, the higher the chances of more of these dropping you get. The range is a base 35% drop rate at 6 of them defeated without being spotted, all the way up to guaranteeing 2 of them at 30 defeated. If you play well, have your Lucky Strikes equipped, and especially get lucky, you could walk away with 4 or more of these from a full encounter, which can really help speed you along. Wrapping up the Power family, we have Power Crystals, which are dropped exclusively by Wyvern Heartless. They're decently rare at only a 2% base drop rate, but most encounters with Wyverns have enough of them around where you're likely to see at least 1 every encounter or 2 against them. While you could farm these over in Hollow Bastion, I recommend going to the cliff area we fought Clayton and the Stealth Sneak in. This isn't just due to the amount of them present, but also due to the lack of pits for the items to fall into, meaning you're much less likely to lose an item. This location also really works out if you're trying to farm out power shards, as there's plenty of power wilds here that could drop them as well. Our next line is the Bright ingredient set. Bright shards are primarily dropped by Green Requiems at a decent 10% base drop rate. As you might be noticing, as with most shards, you can guarantee one from a white mushroom though, as long as it's one you complete the minigame of with a cure spell. You can find white mushrooms you can use cure on at Deep Jungle's camp, or at the usual location at the end of the world. Bright gems are dropped decently rarely by search ghosts, which sounds scary, but more than likely you have several of these just on law of averages given how plentiful these enemies are in the latter half of the game. Similarly, you can also get these occasionally from white mushrooms if you successfully cast Cure on them 3 times in any location that has that motion to their minigame. Wrapping this lineup, Bright Crystals are dropped exclusively by defenders at a rare 2% base drop rate. Post-rescuing Kyrie, there's several decent farming locations for them, but 2 I personally like is either Traverse Town in general, especially the 3rd District, as well as the entrance hall of Hollow Bastion where we fought Riku. Heck, if you're trying to get trophies, be hopeful while you're farming these they end up dropping their shield, because that's a much rarer drop all the same. On the mention of the Hollow Bastion entrance hall though, let's talk about another Final Mix exclusive, the Energy Stone. These drop commonly enough from stealth soldiers, found occasionally at either Hollow Bastion's entrance hall, or several of them in the Grand Hall where the keyhole was. As long as you defeat one of them, that's a 35% base drop rate. Make sure you have stop on your shortcuts for these fights though, because otherwise it's hard to keep track of where they're going. The next lineup is the Spirit item line, starting with the Spirit Shard. This is another item you probably have a stock of from early game, as they primarily drop from soldiers and large bodies, with drops from large bodies being more common. As is trend, you can guarantee a drop of these from white mushrooms, namely by completing their minigame with a successful arrow cast. You can do that to any white mushroom found in either Halloween Town or the end of the world. Next up on the list are Spirit Gems, primarily dropped by air soldiers. Given how common they are in the middle third of the game, you probably have some of these, but they are decently rare at a 4% base drop rate. The same white mushrooms that could drop the shards can also drop these a bit more often though, assuming you successfully cast arrow on them 3 times. Moving on to our next line already, let's talk about the rare shiny items. There's actively only 2 of these. We actively start at the very rare shiny crystals, dropped exclusively by Wizard Heartless at a rare 2% base drop rate. The best places to farm them overall are either the locations you fought Riku and Hollow Bastion, as well as the little elevator ride across the outside and the back third or so of the world. Taking a run from the start of Hollow Bastion to the end might be more efficient depending on what other items you need though. Just hope you get a Wizard's Relic drop on top of whatever you're trying to grab here. While it might sound disconnected, our next item and final item in this line is the Final Mix exclusive Dazzling Stone. These are dropped by the jet balloons found above the deck of Captain Hook's ship in Neverland. Defeating one of them successfully before they flee has a guarantee of dropping one of these, on top of an additional 20% base chance of a second one. While not a hard fight, especially if you use higher levels of arrow to bounce away its projectiles, you'd be surprised how much that extra 20% chance can really help you along the way. It's heating up now as we roughly hit the halfway point. Let's talk about the Blaze item line. Blaze shards are dropped decently rarely by Red Nocturnes at a 6% base drop rate. As you might be able to predict though, like most shards, you can guarantee a drop of them from white mushrooms by making the 3rd successful cast on them a fire spell. You're spoiled for choices here too, because pretty much every white mushroom in the game does the basic 3 elemental spell poses. The only ones that don't are the ones tied to Pink Agaricus spawns. Thus, these, alongside their Frost and Thunder equivalents, are actively some of the easiest materials to farm out in the game. Next up is the Blaze Gems, which are best found across pretty much all of Agrabah. The Bandit and Fat Bandit Heartless both drop these often enough you'll probably even just grab a few during the plot visit, but any you need to farm can easily be obtained with Lucky Strikes. Since pretty much every white mushroom can drop Blaze Shards, casting fire on them successfully 3 times can also drop these here and again. I'd personally recommend to Agrabah's main streets, the Cave of Wonders exterior, and the first room of the cave for farming locations overall. Closing out this line is the Final Mix exclusive Blazing Stone, which is dropped exclusively by the Chimera found where Oogie's Manor was in Halloween Town. Defeating one of this enemy has a base 35% chance of dropping one of these stones, but you can get extras by knocking their heads back at the bodies during the stun phase. When you knock 6 heads back during this phase, there's a 20% base drop rate of 1, and at 9 heads bounce back, you have an additional 40% chance of 1 dropping. The initial 35% base drop one you get for outright defeating it can be enough to farm repeatedly though, as the execution on bouncing the heads back is harder than most additional drop chances. It is worth it in my eyes though, as the fight itself is just generally annoying for my tastes. Let's cool down from that with the Frost ingredient set. Frost Shards are dropped very regularly by Blue Rhapsodies, and you can call yourself Joseph Joestar because you're damn right my next line is, and you can guarantee one by making your 3rd successful cast on a white mushroom and ice spell. As mentioned prior, pretty much every white mushroom in the game has the ice pose alongside the fire pose, so if you mess up while farming other shards or mystery goos from them, might as well try to grab one of these along the way. Frost Gems are deceptively hard to grab. They're primarily dropped by the Sea Neon and Sheltering Zone Heartless in Atlantica at a 2% and 8% base drop rate respectively. The room immediately outside of Triton's Castle and the room between that and Ariel's Grotto are good for farming via that method. More reliable than that is once again the white mushrooms, as casting Blizzard on them 3 times successfully gives a 10% base drop rate for one of these. Froststones are our next Final Mix exclusive material. These are dropped exclusively by the Grand Ghost found in Monstro's stomach. Whether or not they drop one though is entirely dependent on either defeating them outright or what items you use on them. This can be quite a costly endeavor compared to other drops though, as many of the items that give higher chances for this to drop are either rare, expensive to purchase, or expensive to synthesize in and of themselves. I'd recommend having this be one of your last farms just to have as many items on standby just in case. Rounding out the elemental trio, next up is the Thunder item set. Thunder Shards are dropped occasionally by Yellow Operas, but something white mushrooms successfully with Thunder something guaranteed. Thunder Gems are a tad more annoying to farm, primarily being dropped by Screwdivers and their buddies Aqua Tanks over in Atlantica, 4% and 8% of the time at base respectively. They are of course easier to get from white mushrooms, as the trend has been by hitting them successfully with Thunder 3 times. As with the Fire and Ice patterns, pretty much every white mushroom in the game does the Thunder pattern. Rounding out this item set is the Final Mix exclusive Lightning Stone. This was actually the first Final Mix exclusive material we obtained in the LP, gotten only from the Black Ballads at the Bamboo Thicket in Deep Jungle. There's a 10% base chance to get one each time you hit the correct target, and you're guaranteed one for hitting it 4 times. Stand back and pause buffer just to get the best chance of following where the enemy is moving, as we showed off earlier in the LP, and you should get some pretty quickly. Next up, let's talk the elusive Mithril ingredient set. This line's a little unusual compared to most, in that the best way to earn them is just finding them in chests littered across the various worlds of the game. With that said, both the Pot and Barrel Spider Heartless species have an incredibly low 1% base chance to drop them. In most cases, you're better off attempting either the Pot Scorpion fight in Agrabah or the Arc Behemoths located at the end of the world. The former has a 20% base chance of dropping one if you break the 11 real pots before defeating the creature, and the latter has the same chance if you just defeat one outright. Next up is the Final Mix exclusive Mithril Stone. This is dropped exclusively by the same Pot Scorpion enemy we just mentioned. If you break the 11 real pots in the room before starting the fight, there's a 10% base chance of one being dropped then and there. Defeating the enemy outright has about a 20% base drop, but if you defeat the enemy outright after breaking the pots, there's a 35% base chance of one of these dropping. Ideally, you want to get 2 per try, of course, but it's really unlikely. The items known only as Mithrils, though, are also incredibly rare, especially here in Final Mix. In both releases, you're largely going to be finding most of them in the chests across the various worlds. In Vanilla KH1, you can farm the Behemoths or Angel Stars at the end of the world for them at a 20% base drop or a 1% base drop chance, respectively. Here in Final Mix, though, there's only one way to farm them, and it's the one we'll talk about at the end of this lineup. Oh dear, indeed. At this point, we've reached the end of the drops that are part of ingredient sets, so to speak, so let's talk about the one-off items. First off, there's the Gales that drop either from Angel Star or Invisibles at the end of the world. You may have noticed, like many other items, they've had their drop rates slightly reduced here in Final Mix, but the amount of these enemies present in a run through the world on top of Lucky Strike should make their drop common enough that it's not a major concern for farming. The Final Mix exclusive Dark Matter materials can present a real issue though. We need 14 of them to make every recipe, but they aren't dropped by enemies, and there's only 11 of them found in chests across the game. You need to craft the remaining 3 from a later recipe here in Synthesis, with each requiring 9 lucid shards, 1 gale, and 2 methyl to create. If you were wondering why those specific materials have such a higher requirement here in Final Mix, it's due to needing to make these. Next up, the Orichalcum items can seem to cause similar issues to Dark Matters, as they're also not dropped by enemies at all in Final Mix. Back in Vanilla, this isn't an issue though, because there's fewer required to make every recipe. With that said, this is a much easier issue to fix than the Dark Matters. As we showed at the top of our Synthesis farm, you can just buy these from the item shop in Traverse Town at 5,000 money a pop. Costly, yes, but between selling excess materials you get farming or items you don't need, let alone the money you probably already have up to this point, you can buy the amount you need very easily. Next up, we have Mystery Goos. These are dropped exclusively by the various Mushroom Heartless. The rare truffles have the highest chance of doing so, even guaranteeing one if you juggle them 100 times, but that requires much more execution than the less common drops. You can get them from Pink Agaricus, but similarly I don't recommend it as it requires similar perfection to the rare truffles. Black fungi can drop them occasionally, but it's only a 20% chance and only if you finish them off with a combo finisher. Awkward to do, frankly. White mushrooms are easily your best resource here, especially with how many other items you can get from them along the way. Every white mushroom in the game has a 10% base chance to drop one if you finish off their minigame with the correct spell, and a 20% base chance to drop one if all 3 spells you use in them are the same spell. Pretty much every room you encounter white mushrooms in is good for this, but I'd recommend either the End of the World, of course, the Lotus Forest at Wonderland, or the camp at Deep Jungle. The last material we're going to talk about here is the one that's probably the hardest to farm up and yet also the most lucrative to do so with, Serenity Powers. These are dropped, as talked about at length earlier in the LP, exclusively by the Pink Agaricus Heartless, who themselves only show up after dealing with the stopped white mushrooms in either Deep Jungle's treehouse or Atlantica's undersea cave areas. Serenity Powers get increasingly more common the higher your combo gets against a stopped Pink Agaricus. Namely, you have a chance every 10 hits starting from the 40th hit. Hits 40, 50, and 60 each have a separate 10% chance of one dropping, while hits 70, 80, and 90 are all separate 20% chances. Hitting a Pink Agaricus 100 times in a single stop guarantees a drop. There's a lot of setup that goes into this specific item, and you're likely best off waiting until late in the grind for this, as talked about earlier when we covered this in the LP. That's every single material in the game, but there's one thing we should talk about before we go back to the main footage. Let's talk about a facet of synthesis farming I've only hinted at prior largely, Bambi. His Paradise ability can actively assist you in this process. Namely, as he's out and you defeat enemies, his gauges fill up. If you max out a gauge while he's out, he always drops an item. Filling up one gauge largely only gives you consumable items, but depending on the world you're in, filling a second and third gauge has decent chances of dropping relevant synthesis materials. The exact rates per world are listed here for both Vanilla and Final Mix. It's not as reliable as other methods in the case of certain items, especially in Final Mix as the numbers show, but if you're having issues with some materials, hey, it's worth a shot just to try and get a breather. With that damn near 20-minute overview out of the way, let's go make everything we've worked for the last several parts. With that all out of the way, let's now make every single recipe in the game. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single item along the way, but I do want to make note of some specific ones all the way up to the final 3 especially. In the second set of 6 recipes, there's the Golem Chain, which is really good for physical players or Goofy in specific, as it boosts the equipped person's strength by 3 and defense by 1. In the same set here in Final Mix, at least it's in set 3 in Vanilla, is the Rune Armor, which boosts the equipped person's defense by 2 and MP by 1. The Moogle badge in that set though is especially good as it boosts the equipped party member's HP by 6, MP by 1, and AP by 2. In the third recipe set, there's the Master Earring, which gives an additional 4 AP and 2 defense to whom it's equipped, alongside the Gaia Bangle, which boosts HP by 9 and defense by 3. There's also the Titan Chain, which gives an additional 4 strength and 2 defense to whoever it's equipped. Recipe set 4 has accessories like the Heart Guard, which boosts HP by 3 and defense by 4, as well as the 3 stars, which gives a defense boost of 4 on top of a 20% resistance to the 3 basic elements. There's also the Atlas Armlet, which boosts MP and defense by 2, as well as the Mighty Crystal Crown that boosts HP by 6, MP by 1, AP by 3, and strength and defense by 2 each. That's easily one of the best accessories in the game. Also noteworthy, after making 15 unique items, you get the Encounter Plus ability, which actively makes it so you only need to go one room away for enemies to respawn rather than two. It's a minor speed up, but if you're doing multiples of every single accessory, it can be actively very useful. Set 5 stars the Cosmic Arts, which boosts HP by 9, MP by 2, and AP by 2, alongside the EXP Bracelet and Ribbon. The former gives a 30% EXP boost at the cost of 2 strength and defense. The latter gives 3 defense on top of a flat 20% elemental resistance. Set 6, though, is entirely some of the best weapons in the game, though you need to make some extra dark matters to forge Sora's Ultima weapon, his best Keyblade in the game. Goofy's 7-element shield boosts his strength by 4 and MP by 3. It's medium in size, so it can do decent at attacking, but its recoil status 1, so it's not the best for interrupting attacks. Donald's Fantasista staff is decent, but not as good compared to the 7 elements is for Goofy. It boosts Donald's strength and MP by 3, and it's got a long length and 30 recoil, so it's decent for physical attacking, but unlike several other of his physically based rods, it actively doesn't impact his casting at all, which is nice. Meanwhile, the real star here is Sora's Ultima weapon. While it has easily the most complex recipe in the game, including the need to forge extra dark matters as there are less of them in the level design than what the weapon requires, it is absurdly powerful and even got slightly buffed here in Final Mix due to the extra steps. Here in Final Mix, the Ultima weapon boosts Sora's strength by 14, up from 12 in vanilla. It also boosts his MP by 2. It's far and away the longest Keyblade in the game, and it doesn't stop there. While other Keyblades will balance their length and stats in some form to make it feel like they have a focus, this one goes all out. It has a 2x crit rate, so your damage is already stronger due to that, but it also has a crit damage bonus of 2 here in Final Mix, slightly nerfed down from 4 in vanilla. It also has a recoil stat of 90, so you can interrupt pretty much every attack in the game. It is a fantastic final reward from Synthesis that I seldom ever really go for. There are some fantastic rewards across all of Synthesis, but the effort required to grind out the materials here in Kingdom Hearts 1, especially in Final Mix, just doesn't feel worth the time you put into it in my experience. Watchful Eyes, for instance, will have noticed that we reached the final save point at the end of the world at nearly 17 or 18 hours on the pause menu in-game timer, and now we're closing in on 26. That's 8 hours of pure farming, alongside things like the Hades Cup and Super Bosses, admittedly, but still a lot of time just spent on farming. Admittedly, I could have spaced out the farming a little bit, maybe farming the materials from the first few worlds after completing them and things like that, but that doesn't remove the farming, it just alleviates the stress of doing it all at once, which is a better solution, yes, but it ultimately doesn't fix the process being tedious. Later entries in the series, specifically Kingdom Hearts 2 Beyond, actively have their own unique ways of making this process more interesting and streamlining it that ultimately make for a more fun experience, but here in Kingdom Hearts 1, it's far from my favorite thing to do. I want to say I've played Kingdom Hearts 1 maybe about 15 times across my lifetime thus far. I've maybe gone for the Ultima weapon 3 or 4 times at most. The first 2 times were on the vanilla PS2 release. The other times have been here on Final Mix. I just do not enjoy the grind of it here in Kingdom Hearts 1. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 40, we're going to take our new tools and go raid the remaining super bosses before finally venturing off towards endgame. See you guys then.